In today's video, I will be showing you how to create a simple local chat system using Lua and Love2D. Here is a demonstration of it. That shown, let's begin. Before we get started, make sure you have Love2D installed. This is how your hierarchy should be looking like. Here we have the client folder. It will contain all the Lua files that will be used by users connected to the chat. The server folder will contain the Lua files used by the server. Shared folder will be used by both clients and the server. It will only contain serialization file, which will be responsible for encoding and decoding data sent over the network. Let's start off by writing our encoding and decoding methods into the serialization file. Here we have an encoding method to encode our data when we want to send it. And here we have a decoding method when we want to decode our data. We will start with the client side as it is much more complicated and will take much more time compared to server setup. Let's start with the text button class. Here we create a constructor for our text button class. Here we define a function that will calculate the position of our text button based on its position, anchor point, and size. The same calculations, but for text. Here we have a function that will check if our mouse is within the bounds of the button. In other words, if the mouse has entered the boot of. This method will draw our button on the screen, its shape, color, position, size, and other important components. This method will listen every time our user clicks a button. If they click it, then it will execute the function passed to it. In our case, it is F. This method will be called per frame to update the position and size of our text button. It is important to do this so that when users resize the window screen, the position and size of the button are also updated. This will add text alignment to our text object. This method will add text to our text object. And this will override our current text with the past one. Now let's code our input box class. Here I'm just gonna copy the code from our text button file and simply change the variable names. The input box class has almost all the same attributes as the text button class. The only thing that has changed is that we have added a box scaling attribute that will tell our Lua program in which direction our input box should be scaled horizontally or vertically. Now let's move on to the scrollable window class that will be used to create a scrollable chat window. Here we have the contents attribute. It will store the messages that will be displayed in the chat window. And here we have the content puz and content size attributes, which will control the size and position of the scrolling window based on how much content it has. This function will be responsible for calculating the width of our message. In other words, if our message, let's say, has 2 lines, when the first line is full, we want to move our text to the second line and make sure it starts on the left side. This function will calculate our final formatted message with the lines. This will calculate the scroll offset for our window based on how much content it contains. If our contents exceed the size of the chat window, it will start scrolling down. This method will be called every time the user scrolls the chat. If they do, it will scroll it up or down depending on which direction you scroll the mouse wheel. This will give us a number for the alpha channel. If the message is outside the chat window, it will make it invisible, otherwise it will be displayed. This method is called whenever users send a message to the chat to ensure it is stored in the contents attribute. Now, before we start writing code for our client and server files, you can copy my configurations into the configuration.lua file for the client and server side, but you can modify them to suit your specific needs. Now let's write the code for our final main client file and then move on to the server. Here I completely forgot that we have to include two functions from the scroll window file in the input window file, namely, calculate lines for content and accumulate chat message width. Just follow the steps I do here. Here we define the IP address and port variables. For the IP address, it should be the one provided by your router. You can check it with ifconfig for Windows and ifconfig for Mac and Linux. Now let's move on to the last one, the server. finally finished configuring the client and server. Now let's run a test. Here we are facing a problem with input box file. Just follow my steps to solve it. Now let's try to run our client again and see if it works. Okay, our client is working and that's good, but what happens now is if there is no text in the input box, it will just be a blank field. Again, follow my steps to solve this issue. Now we should have no more errors and our client should work perfectly. Great, now the text is displayed in the input box. Now let's check if our chat is working. Wonderful, our chat is working. Now let's start multiple client instances and see if they communicate with each other. Great, now I'll connect from my other device on the network and see if that works too. For this to work, you should have Love2D, client and shared folders on the other device. You can do this using GitHub or other services for publishing your code.